So this session is entitled, it's a panel discussion. It's not research papers, it's a panel discussion. And it's entitled Dialogic Approaches to Oneness and Flourishing. So I have the honor of chairing this session. I am Associate Dean at Kent State University. And there are 4 panelists. All of us are from the United States. The first panelist is Allan Leslie Combs, and he is a professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies, founder of the Society for Consciousness Studies USA. Victoria Herriott, who is Dean of Faculty at Maharishi International University. David Wick, who is Executive Director of the Ashland Culture of Peace Commission. And Mino Akhtar, author, SufiDialogue.com. So the flow of this session will be that each of the panelists will speak from 5 to 7 minutes, giving their perspective on dialogic approaches to oneness and flourishing. And then following that, we will have a panel discussion. And the discussion, I would love to involve you, the audience. So if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat and I will weave them into our panel discussion. All right. So without further ado, we will start with Allan.
There are 2 or 3 themes I want to touch on. One of them is that we're all interconnected, more than we think, I think, more than most of us think. And by that, I don't mean in a kind of trivial way or sociological way necessarily, but that each of us has people around us that we influence, that we interact with, that we're involved with in a lot of different ways. And the person each one of us is and the messages we send, whether consciously or unconsciously, spread out to people around us more than you might imagine. And then they have a ripple effect beyond that. So you can have some fun playing with the, for example, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. If you can get some slides going, we'll take a look at that. But it just means that each one of you listening is no more than 6 degrees away from pretty much anybody else in the world, certainly anybody else in the first and second world, because you talk to people who talk to other people who interacted with emails and so on. Nowadays, our influence is really much broader than you might think. It turns out that, well, you know, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon is based on the actor Kevin Bacon and how many people he has played with. So here's a good example. You know somebody who knows something that's 6 degrees, it's Bill Gates. But it really doesn't really take that many degrees usually, because if you go to the next figure, I think you'll see that there recently been discovered there are key figures. You know, this sort of analysis is used for, excuse me, for disease control too. Who's spreading what to who? It really got started with AIDS research, but there are key people then. There are people that you know who know a lot of people themselves and who are influential. So in fact, the distance between you and the President of the United States must be maybe much closer than you think it is. My point then is that who we are, what we say and what we do, and what kind of examples we represent in our own behavior spread around us. You can go on to the next slide. So there's a kind of ripple effect. We have more influence on other people than we think. And one of the points I want to make just briefly is that the way the media is configured nowadays, if you turn on the news, of course, some news agencies are better than others. I won't mention names right now, but the fact is that you turn on news and you see celebrities and major politicians, and it's about it. Once in a while, they interview some poor person whose mother died without medical help or something. But really, your influence, what you say, what you do has a ripple effect. For example, I'm a teacher. I interact with well over 100 students all the time, and many of you do too. And I'm an example of someone they see and interact with, and I communicate my values and ideas to them without even trying. I mean, I don't try. I'm just whoever I am. So there's this ripple effect. I also want to point out that, and we go on to this next slide, that there's a certain subtle quality to this. And those of you in the TM community, those of us, know very well that meditating has influence on other people. And we form fields of some kind that spread out and have an effect on other meditators and other people in general. We've heard a very nice presentation of that from David a few hours ago, that how can influence a whole city, for example. So there's some kind of subtle field that ripples out from us. And so who we are and what we do has an effect. So it's like raising children. What's the best way to teach it? Well, be the model yourself of what you want to communicate. So dialogue is very important to that process. Yeah, this represents the dynamic aspect of it. Dialogue is very important to that process. And I really want to emphasize when I say dialogue, not just talking, but listening. I think listening is really, really important. I've been trained in conflict resolution, and the biggest problem is people don't listen to each other. I can go on to the next slide. That won't put you to sleep. But listening is really, really important. When people come in, husband and wife or whoever, and they're having a fight and get a divorce, and if you do conflict resolution with them, I think you'll learn very quickly that they haven't been listening to each other very well. I have friends in political science that are looking at what's going on internationally. And it seems to me it's the same problem. People aren't listening to each other. And so they run over each other, pay no attention to each other, and so on. So the diagram on the left sort of represents this ripple effect of how people interact. The one in the middle represents the fact that we're all different. And we all come from different backgrounds, different families. And now we're living in a global environment. So we have subpopulations, for example, in the US, around the world, and then we have populations from different cultures. So we have, in a sense, all different colors. And it's really important for us to listen to each other. And while we dialogue, that means talking, but also means listening. And when people quit listening, then you get the conflicts you hear on the news every night. And this brings up the importance of understanding the difference in different groups of people. It's pretty obvious in the US that we have major differences between people of color as a whole, people, Caucasians as a whole, Latino, or Latinx populations, as we call them now. And we need to be listening to each other. I could go on and on about this. I'm sure you could too. The problems that comes from just pushing each other around. So we have different cultural groups and different subcultural groups. We also, I'm a developmental psychologist, and I'm very aware of the importance of developmental stages. And I won't go on about that right now, but everybody knows about Maslow's hierarchy. And what we've seen in the US and in Britain, I'm not so sure about the rest of Europe, but somewhere up near, not quite to the top of that, the yellow and green, caring for each other, being aware of other people's needs, and also being thoughtful. We've generated many, many good social movements, women's rights, care for animals, slavery has disappeared, thank God, in most places in the world, and so on. But somewhere up around that green level, self-esteem and caring for other people, folks often get busy in helping other people do things the right way. So we've got the whole conflict over political correctness and so on. Is a very complicated issue, but more than one social analyst has blamed the whole almost insurrection in DC a few months ago, and a lot of other problems around very small population, especially in academia, I have to say, embarrassed to say, that are pushing their values onto other people in a way that is looking down at them, discouraging them, and so on. So I think in order to talk to people in a larger way, and I won't go on and on, but we have to be able to get down, get down and hang out with people that aren't quite so elite, and appreciate who they are and what their concerns are. Obviously, I can talk on and on about this, and would be happy to do so, but we have some other people here who've been kind enough to let me run on. So thank you. That's sort of an introduction to some of the ideas that are on my mind.
Thank you, Allan. That's just a great start to the session. Vicki, do you want me to?
I think, yeah, I think, let me see if I can do it.
Okay.
Let me try. Looks like I can.
We'll let you try.
Okay, is everybody seen?
Yes.
Mediation. Okay. So I'm a lawyer by training, and I've, for the last 15 years, have been teaching mediation in the context of our business program. And most recently, I'm the program director of a program in leadership and workplace conflict resolution. And mediation is a key part of that. And since this is a conference on leadership, I feel that every leader really has to be able to handle conflict. It would be nice if there wasn't any and we could just prevent it maybe from the get-go, and certainly there are things we can do to move in that direction. But as long as we have differences, and Allan did a great job of talking about the fact that we are different. We come from different families. We're in different bodies. There's always going to be a bump up, a conflict. So how can we resolve that in the most sustainable, nourishing, holistic way? And the theme that I use when I teach mediation is giving is the basis of receiving. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but just for those of you who maybe aren't.
Vicki, could you go to the full screen mode, please?
Okay. Then I'm not sure I can change the slides, but hopefully I can.
That's
Okay.
good.
Is that better? Okay.
Yes.
So mediation is a process for resolving disputes where an intermediary helps the conflicting parties have a conversation, a dialogue, if you will, to jointly resolve their concerns. So bringing in a second element, a mediator, can resolve a problem by providing a new perspective, just as turning on a light illuminates a room and a snake is discovered to be only a string, taken from an old story that brings in the importance of the second element. The mediator is a neutral, impartial third party who's brought in by the parties to help resolve a conflict. So the mediator has no skin in the game, as we say. They're not involved in the conflict. They're there only to help resolve. I often say to parties in a mediation that I'm not there to be on the side of either one of them. I'm there to be on the side of the resolution, of the solution to the problem. So I'm there to help them come up with a resolution. So a successful mediator creates an environment of trust and openness to all possibilities that allows the parties to resolve, for some reason I can't, let me just get rid of this. Can't read my whole slides when your pictures are there, that allows the parties to reach a mutually satisfying resolution of their problems. The more established the mediator and the parties are in the unified field of consciousness, the field of infinite creativity at the basis of their own awareness, the more effortless the mediation process is. That isn't always the case, but that is, the more we can help them reach that level, the easier it is for us to move forward. Mediation works because the parties have an opportunity to share what matters most to them and to work together to resolve a conflict in a safe environment. Agreeing to bring in a mediator is the first step in joint problem solving. This may seem sort of simplistic, but we've got two parties who haven't been able to agree maybe on anything, and now they're agreeing to bring in a third party to help them resolve. So they've agreed on two things. One, that they really do want to get this problem resolved, and that they're willing to get some help, and that they're willing to bring in a particular person to help them with that joint problem solving. So well begun is half done is an old saying that expresses the principle that the first steps of any endeavor lay the groundwork for its success. So we start mediation by congratulating the parties for coming together to decide to come together to resolve their conflict rather than walk away, or rather, unfortunately, in our kind of litigious society, to go to court to resolve their differences. And in that case, nobody really is the winner. Successful mediators are good communicators with excellent active listening skills. Just as Allan said, most conflicts arise because people weren't really listening to each other. So a successful mediator uses and models their active listening skills. They appreciate differences in conversational styles. They're non-judgmental. They're positive and calm. They understand the power of language and the power of silence. They know when to intervene and when to withdraw. Ideal mediators are obviously established in being and effortlessly guide the process to a successful conclusion. But all of us as mediators can move in that direction of using our best active listening skills, modeling the kind of behavior that we want from the parties to the mediation, and guiding the process in such a way that we give the parties the sense of security and trust, and perhaps show them a perspective that they haven't seen before in the other side's position. So that's kind of our responsibility as mediators, as facilitators. I mentioned at the beginning that I say that the basis of successful mediation is giving, is the basis of receiving. So I just wanted to share a quote from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi from The Science of Being that I use with my students as kind of a prelude to the course. So the technique of receiving help from the surroundings is in our attitude of giving. If you want to receive, you must give, is a law of nature. If you are open with someone, they will be open with you. If you want love from someone, give your love to them. If you want kind and sympathetic behavior from someone, be kind and sympathetic to them. If you want comfort from them, prove yourself comforting to them. If you want admiration from others, do something to show your admiration for them. If you are sincere in giving, you receive it in return, manifold. And this is exemplified in the mediation process by this practice of active listening. That's giving somebody the most important thing you can give them, which is your attention. So by giving people attention, hopefully they will turn around and give that attention back to you. They'll trust you, they'll open up to you, and they will often reveal the deeper interest behind the demands that they might have, and maybe even the whys of those interests, so that we can come up with creative solutions to help them really solve the problem and get away from the positional bargaining that they're holding on to. And sometimes also within a conflict, we have reason to forgive. And Maharishi also said, when you forgive, all nature enjoys your brilliance and returns joy to you. And so often the value to me and the magic of mediation is that it allows the parties to communicate with each other outside of the legal system and within, as we say, this protective bubble. And they're allowed to say to each other things that maybe their lawyers wouldn't let them say, like, I'm sorry. And sometimes hearing the words, I'm sorry, is all the other party really wanted. So having that ability to forgive is, I think we've all heard to err is human, to forgive divine. And that's, we want to give everyone the possibility of being divine and having that opportunity to forgive. So I'll let this go now and pass on to somebody else.
Thank you, Vicki. That was just incredible. David is up next.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with everyone. And I'm speaking about the power of an image to inspire dialogic approaches to greater consciousness. Mapping the path to a flourishing humanity requires a shift in mindset and behavior, and to live the values embraced in a more evolved consciousness than is often displayed by communities of people. As was mentioned in yesterday's conference keynote presentations, 1, education develops our consciousness and creativity. 2, dialogue opens up to greater consciousness. 3, engage the principles, the practices that help us to grow beyond the boundaries of our current limited perceptions. A step in this direction has been taken by launching the Ashland Culture Peace Commission, which is founded in large part on the United Nations Declaration and Program of Action on a Culture of Peace, and the presence and inspiration of the World Peace Flame. Both have opened dialogic approaches to oneness and flourishing. So I'll just talk about it. That what the video is going to show is the World Peace Flame, which we brought to Ashland, Oregon. And it was discovered in Wales by Irene Kai, who's the co-founder of the Ashland Culture Peace Commission. And it was brought here as an inspiration of healing for the cultural healing of the Native Americans and also Chinese who lived here and also died here. And the flame itself is a very powerful inspiration. It was placed in the Southern Oregon University in a pavilion, which was built in part for that. And the peace flame has become a very powerful image, a very powerful symbol. That's the point. And so around this, it's a flame. It's in a lantern, glass lantern, and it's very simple, but it is so engaging, so powerful. So the Ashland Middle School children became the flame keepers, and the school their middle school is across from that, from the street, across the street from that, and they became the flame keepers, refueling it every week. And this opened a huge dialogue with them about what does that mean to be a flame keeper around peace, peace in their own lives, peace in their families. This also became the symbol which we organized around a Ashland Global Peace Conference, where we had the senator from Oregon, the state representatives and senators, city mayor, from the whole region, the top leaders who came together, and they talked about their work, peace building in their work, and also what that flame meant to them and the inspiration it had. So that opened up a whole level of conversation that never, ever has happened before, and never would without that inspiring image, that symbol. And it has done a great deal to impact this community and also internationally. This is all the ambassador from the United Nations, Ambassador Anurul Chaudhry, came here because of the peace flame, because he saw what was the impact it was having on the community. But all this is opening dialogue, which is opening to greater consciousness, is greater awareness to the higher levels, as Allan was talking about, the higher levels of our needs that we have. But this is opening consciousness that otherwise would not happen. But again, it's a symbol that we move and rally around. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I like the fact that when you evoke imagery, it evokes the feeling level, and there is communication at that level as well. And I'm sorry we can't see your video because it is powerful. And now we move on to our fourth panelist, Mino. And Mino, I will share your PowerPoint.
Thank you. First of all, I want to applaud this noble conference, which talks about a flourishing humanity. It is so close to my heart, and I am so privileged that Chris Laszlo introduced me to Anil. Anyway, so I'm a practitioner, and I feel very humbled to be speaking with all these intellectuals who are studying the field of consciousness. I've been a practitioner in the corporate world, and now I do it in the nonprofit world. And I want to start with one day as I was working in a big telecom firm. I ran across.
Mino, if you could go full screen mode also, please. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I think Cathy can do it.
Cathy, yeah.
I thought I did go full screen.
Slideshow, yeah. So.
Is it showing slideshow now?
No.
Ah.
Yeah, that's better.
Third time's the charm. Okay.
So I ran into a consulting firm. Their byline was unleashing the human spirit at work. And I left my IT career, and I've been in organizational change since then. And dialogue was our power tool, our super tool to use in all settings. So let me go back to the kind of dialogue, or what we meant by dialogue, and then how we practiced it. So David Bohm was a philosopher, physicist, and he had actually a lot of collaboration with Krishnamurti also. And he actually wrote a book on dialogue, a booklet, which is interesting because he was, philosophy was all about wholeness, away from fragmentation. Many of his works were about that and how we can heal the world. Dialogue comes from the Greek word dialogos. Logos means the word, or in our case, we would think of the meaning of the word. And dia means through. It doesn't mean to. The picture image that this derivation suggests is of a stream of meaning flowing among and through us and between us, out of which will emerge a new understanding. It's something creative. And this shared meaning is the glue or cement that holds people and societies together. I'm actually a member of the US Academy of Professional Dialogue, and we continue his work and his definition of dialogue by practicing it and having this community of practice. But he talked about participatory consciousness. So as Allan said, we create a field, a shared field, when we listen, as Vicky said, and speak in a way that honors our wholeness, our divine, and we see the divine in each of us. And I believe that this is a tool that we need more than ever in today's world. And I think we can reach harmony in the individual and collective, that this tool can get us there, especially here in the US, as we are in a very fragmented state. Next slide, please. So in the field of organizational transformation, what we practiced was using dialogue to engage the hearts and minds of people at all levels. So these were cross-level, cross-functional, cross-regional, and global engagement in very large global firms. We would first build the understanding of what, let's say, a new strategy or a change or a merger meant. And again, this was done in groups of 50 to 100 people, where we would begin to have them talk about what this meant to them. So first they would understand why the company is moving in a certain direction. Then they would dialogue about what it meant for them in their particular unit, their team, or their region. And then we engaged them and they engaged others. As Allan said, we're all influencers. So these hot coals, if you will, that we blew on as consultants, they would then go out and become the advocates and the passionate sort of ambassadors of this change. And that's how the commitment was built. So it was, again, creating a different consciousness, a more deeper understanding of themselves, because often they would speak about how hurt they were, let's say, by the change, or how deceived they were by, what management had told them before. I'll quickly share an incident. Once a telecom firm divested half of its IT organization, which was huge, to IBM. And we had a room full of people, and they were very angry, and they'd written on flip charts all their inner thoughts, their inner emotions, their feelings about this big, horrible change. The senior leader walked in and apologized and very humbly said that, I wish we had done it differently. The shift of energy in the room was palpable, because here a senior leader who would normally be defensive had opened up his own heart and touched the hearts of others. So that's just one example from my corporate experience that I love. Go to the next slide. I continue this, of course, along with the organizational transformation. We did a lot of leadership development work. And along with the development, there's a lot of content that we teach leaders on how to be a leader. There's concept, frameworks, processes, information. There's a lot of doing that we have them do. They practice it, they come back, we do action learning, and then they execute, and then we do follow-ups. But more and more, we spend time on the being. And as, next click, as Garvin said, leadership is above all a way of being that requires authenticity, personal mastery, self-awareness, vision, mindset, emotion. It is so important to work on that being. And what we would do is create safe spaces for leaders to go inward and then be courageous enough to share what they discovered, what ego sort of conflicts they had to deal with, to be courageous enough to share it first in their small groups of leaders, and then perhaps with their teams, their leadership teams, and outward. So the work on being is very important. That's why I applaud, this conference's theme and its relation of leadership and consciousness. Next slide, please. I'm continuing this work in interfaith settings and even Mid-East conflict settings where Israelis and Palestinians come together. And what I found is that we have to first build very solid relationships. And these relationships become almost like friendships. There's food involved, music, religious practices sharing, and so on, and opening up yourself as a person. And then we align on values. So this is a dialogue guide I developed for the Interfaith Women's Group here in Bergen County, New Jersey. So we align on values that we will honor and hold each other accountable to. Things like inclusion and diversity, listening to the periphery. So if somebody is quiet, bringing them in, respect and dignity. So the way we speak and listen, we are always wanting to respect and dignify whoever is in the room. Curiosity and learning about differences, thriving on differences rather than lamenting differences. Growth and development, which means a desire to grow oneself and transform into a higher form of being. Insaniyat is an Urdu and Turkish word I often use to describe these noble human behaviors. And then community, which is a way of that community is sacred and has always been in human history. And the richness of community enriches us all. So as we create these puddles, let's call it puddles of harmony and peace, we can grow these, so we should never give up hope. Even if we see fragmentation all around us, we are a solid sort of, a field, and we can spread that field. And then spiritual union and connection. So we see our faiths as multiple ways to God, whether you call Brahma, God, Allah, we all see that the whole point is to go towards wholeness and love in the world. So I value this work very much, and we continue to do it, and hope these lakes, these puddles become lakes, and go to the next slide, which become rivers, which feed the ocean. You know, as Rumi said, you are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop. So the final realization is that we have much more power, again, to go back to the beginning, and as Allan said, and our inner healing is a way to outer healing. Each conversation brings us closer to that source, in us and in others. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mino. There's so many beautiful thoughts here. So I wanted to read a couple of comments. Megan Anderson had written to everyone that she's a student in Vicky's mediation course. It's been a tremendous experience learning how to mediate through conflict and grow ourselves, our relationships, and our organizations. So that's shout out to you, Vicky. And then Ayako has written, the leadership is the connectedness. Connect to oneself first before connect to others. Top leaders know how to live authentically, operating from a place of passion and openness. More important, the leaders need to learn how to look inward as a way to build stronger, more satisfying relationships. And so, you know, this reminds me of some of the questions I put together draw on previous panel sessions. And yesterday in session 4, Dr. Dennis Heaton brought up the notion of systems thinking and the value of being able to comprehend the whole. Now, this comment talked about the leader, but building stronger and satisfying relationships. So do any of the panelists want to talk about the systems view where we have the individuals and we have the collective?
It sounded to me like one of the things that Mina does is just that. You know, she's dealing with the individuals, but she's helping them see the wholeness of what the organization's goals are. Forgive me for jumping in there, Mina. But when I heard the question, I felt like, oh gosh, that's just what you do. And in a way, that's what happens in mediation too, is that we try to help the parties see the bigger wholeness, how they're connected to each other. And the reason I encourage mediation is because, just as Allan said, and David, and basically everyone in the panel, is that we are connected and these relationships continue. And if we do something that's harmful to resolve our conflict, like go to court, then that really damages almost irrevocably a relationship. But if we can do something to make those connections stronger, then that's going to strengthen the relationship.
Yeah, I know Allan wanted to say something, and then I will comment. Allan, you were muted. You were muted. Allan, you're on mute.
I just wanted to agree. I think if you're in a leadership position with any group of people, you know, my original training in systems theory and leadership was when my second wife moved in with her daughter, and where I was living with my daughter, and suddenly I became aware of dynamics between people. You know, I had a younger daughter who was my own, and was the ruler of the roost, and then there was a stepdaughter, and then I had a new wife, to say nothing of the dogs. And somehow they all looked at me to be the leader, I guess because I owned the house. But, you know, it taught me a lot about equanimity and just, you know, you've got to respect everybody and have some sense for what they are passionate about, or that would have been the end of my second marriage as well. And organization building, I see the same thing. I'm building an organization right now in Ecuador, and everybody doesn't agree on the board, but it's a matter of everybody having a voice and respecting each other. And I often end up in the role of saying, oh, let's explain this a little differently so that John doesn't think of it as resisting, but as, whatever. So yeah, I think it's all systems out there.
Yeah. And I think I
All
would
the way
emphasize,
down.
yeah,
Systems all the way down, yeah.
I was going to say that the leaders we coached and worked with, we would teach them to see the organizational system as a dynamic, fluid, co-created entity. So ideas could come from anywhere, and they could be fertilized across the organization because it's a dynamic system. So it wasn't like, okay, only marketing should do this or operations should do this. So the dynamic aspects of systems thinking, and that sometimes chaos might be a gift, from which new ideas would come, and to leverage that and mind that.
I'd just like to share that I found that so much of what can happen on the systems level obviously begins on the individual level, on the personal level. And an example of that was in the founding of the Ashland Cultural Peace Commission, which was in 2015, that two people who, one was engaged with media, the other was engaged with the city council as a counselor, were initial commissioners within it, and with all the things that we did around peace building and inner peace, and they both one became the state senator, and the other became a state representative representing this area, but carrying what they had gotten, what they had learned in that initial earlier days, plus other things, which is impacting the state. You're talking about system. It is moving that whole system as well as the other organizations they're part of. So just like it is such a fluid, obviously individual, personal, and systemic relationship. So that was just a direct experience.
That's great. There is a comment for you, David, in the chat. Dennis Heaton had said, I found a degree of connection to David Wick. My birthday, September 21st, is UN International Day of Peace. David helped launch the United Nations NGO Pathways to Peace, which had assisted the adoption of the UN's International Day of Peace in 1981.
Mm.
So what a great shout out. Thank you.
That's great, wonderful.
Yeah.
The degree of separation comes together.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Great.
Another comment in the chat is from Michael. Dr. Gupta said something beautiful this morning about the leader has to make the other the owner of their ideas. Mm-hmm. It can only happen connecting in a level of communication, emotions, empathy, and values. Would any of you like to comment on that? That's beautiful.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I'll give some examples that we used to do. We used to have fireside chats where cross levels of many functions would be speaking with a senior leader, which normally wouldn't happen. You go the chain of command. So we were trying to break down those walls and allow for ideas to flow freely in the system. And the leader, if they are authentic, if they're genuine, if they're great listeners, enable that field to happen and allow the more innovation really in their organizations.
Thank you, Mino. There's another comment. Organizations, this is from Raj Shekhar. Organizations are notional entities and actually exist in the interconnectivity between the people and the environment. Without inner development, I guess all people are bound by their little ego boundaries and do not think holistically. How can a leader break up ego boundaries? It's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good question. I think one way is by modeling, and I think this has been mentioned by some of the other panelists, that if we model the behavior we want our followers to exhibit, it's by being ourselves. Amina's example of the person coming forward and expressing their own vulnerability, admitting their own mistake, and how powerful that was. That's a very powerful tool to actually help expand the awareness of the followers, because up until then they thought there was only one way for leaders to respond, and that was defensively and protectively. But to see somebody be open then expands their own possibilities of being open. And again, I think the same thing is true within mediation, that the mediator helps model the kind of behavior they want the two parties to exhibit, but also you can give people tools. One of the things that I've done with my class is to get them to really think about the emotions that may be going on in other people by mirroring them. Mirroring is an exercise that helps you really pay very close attention to somebody else, just because that's part of the exercise. And by giving them that attention, you also find yourself mirroring it in your brain. That's what we know that from neuroscience, that that's what actually happens. And that creates that same emotion within ourselves. So if we can get people to do exercises, and there, lots of people, consultants who go around and help people learn how to do those things, it does make a difference, I think, in how people perceive each other, because they do develop empathy. And empathy is something that can grow. It doesn't have to be static. It's not that some people are born more empathetic than others. I think that's kind of out there, but I don't think that's true. Some people may have naturally more empathy, but I think we can all develop it.
Mhm, mhm.
Thank you. Mikael put a comment in: increasing consciousness, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence. Leaders can also do things like, in the previous session, Dr. Brown talked about this program that they have at Loyola Medical School. And it was a leader that made that decision to commit to having a course around meditation in their curriculum, so that it is a formalized, it's not given short shrift. It's as important as any other class that they do. And so when a leader has an opportunity to make a decision like that, to open up consciousness increasing possibilities for anyone in their sphere of influence, then that's a very powerful thing to do.
Yeah, if I could mention, in the Professional Dialogue Academy, we have a member, Dr. Harold Clark, who has brought dialogic culture to the Department of Corrections in Virginia. Imagine, this is a place where the least you would expect a leader, but it's that leader who made that decision. What a powerful change.
Yeah. And this is how leaders have an outsized influence. They have leverage that the rest of us, if you're not in that leadership group, you don't quite have. Dr. Rick, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, in the talk room, Dr. Judy Neal yesterday, she was talking about how corporations are paying more attention to the mindfulness and meditative practices within them, because of the benefits thereof. And it just brought to mind to me, in 1982, I worked at Levi Strauss in San Francisco, and they're building their new campus, and made a suggestion and brought some information about it, to create quiet rooms. And so the quiet rooms were a place that employees could go and be quiet and have meditative space and so on. And they built them, but over time they turned into offices. So maybe they're coming back again to focus in on that.
Yes. She gave just a really nice chronology of how the thinking has evolved. And that also happens when the leader goes somewhere else. Does the incoming leader embrace that or not?
Right.
Yeah. Dr. Ray Gahani says, words usually embody values of different cultures. For example, Japanese value silence and reflection, whereas Americans like to verbalize. How would you bridge their mutual understandings?
If I may, I don't want to dominate here, but I taught intercultural understanding at the pharmaceuticals I worked in. So what we would do is educate and share the principles, the values of each culture. And then we would have teams practice these kind of conversations and learn to embrace the others' culture's values. So, Japanese might speak out more or would be coached to speak more, and then Americans to listen better, and the Europeans somewhere in between. So it was, yeah. So it can be done. You have to, again, create awareness. It's all about awareness building.
Absolutely. Here's another question that refers to session 4 yesterday, and this is related. Albator's talked about the value of self-awareness in leadership and how any other comments about how that might relate to successful dialogue. When the
Well, I'd
leader-
say, that's essential. If you're going to be an effective leader, having the awareness of how you're functioning and also self-reflection, and to be an effective leader, you grow, evolve, but you have to have, be able to look in the mirror and do have the self-reflection, and also being open to, input from others, but, your own dialogue. So it's all about personal growth. The whole focus of consciousness is how we go through processes and experiences and practices that open more and more to our greater being. I mean, just becoming knowledgeable about who and what we are in the greater consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll have a comment on that. Relevant to several of the questions, starting with the business of dealing with the ego or egoism, and some of the others. I don't mean to be preaching to the choir here, but we have the research to support the idea that nothing really moves us forward as effectively as meditation, because what it does in the process of meditating is you begin to see yourself. You begin to stand back in a sense and see yourself. And so, for example, Ken Wilber has this book called Integral Meditation. I'm not suggesting it is a method, but he's right. You meditate a while over time, and you begin to see yourself in an objective way. And then if you meditate more, you step back further, and then you step back further. So you see more and more of what you are. And as you understand yourself, then your ego is one of the things you see instead of you are. So yeah, meditation in any kind of community of discourse is really a great asset to having self-knowledge as you go along, as well as understanding other people better.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to say something on that point as well, kind of
Yeah.
back to the ego. My first husband, Charles Skip Alexander, did his dissertation on the effects of transcendental meditation with prisoners in a maximum security prison in Massachusetts. And one of the measures he looked at was Levenger's ego development. So these weren't guys who were particularly looking for development. They were actually doing whatever they could to get good time so that they could, get early release. They weren't necessarily going for self-development or anything. But what he found was that they, of course, whether they believed in it or not, it was having an effect, and a very profound effect, which they quickly realized. But I don't know if anyone's familiar with Levenger's ego development measure, but it really.
Oh, yes, I'm the psychologist.
I
I'm
know
very
you're a
familiar
developmental
with it.
psychologist, you know it well. So one of the prisoners, when asked, it's an open-ended question test, asked what gets me into trouble is blank. And the prisoner said, my hands. Now that's a very low level of integration of your ego.
Yes.
No, it's not my fault. My hand's doing something. After some time of meditation, when he was given the test again, his response was, what gets me into trouble is my inability to control my temper. And that was a very powerful example of growth.
I thought you were going to mention some other part of his body, but but I think that's a great story. Really, it's true. Yeah.
And it
Sorry,
just.
I had to say that.
No, it's okay. It just goes to show that it's that integration of self that's important for the leader to have, self-reflection
Yes.
and self-awareness of part of the leader, but also, as Cathy said, for the leader to introduce programs that will actually help the followers grow in their own self-awareness.
Yeah.
This has been a really fun session.
There's just so much to talk about here. There's another point here that from Dr. Rekahani that I brought up the issue of having the benevolent leaders. How do the consciousness-rooted mice bell / inspire the vicious mice-eating cat leader? So in other words, how do those leaders who are grounded in consciousness and let that guide them in their decisions, how do they influence, inspire those who are stuck in what's kind of old-fashioned management, where you had to be tough and you had to be mean, and that's how people knew you were serious?
Well, I'd say first with success, because everyone listens to success. So if they can see that it's actually more successful to have companies that are sustainable, that are led by compassion and love, as opposed to, fear, the carrot and the stick. But also I think conferences such as this, because once it is out more in the academy that this is actually a viable option, we don't have to be the the mouse-eating cat. There are other ways to lead. I think all the work that everybody in the panel has done, I think, is leading to that. And in all the whole conference are people who are doing just that, trying to get those mouse-eating cats to see the world differently.
And the collective influence of that. I mean, now we have Great Places to Work awards, and you don't get a Great Places to Work award unless you have a leader who really cares about the well-being of the people in the organization. Okay, so here's another point. In session 3A yesterday, Dr. Tony Nader noted, what we put our attention on grows. And Maharishi also used to say, the world is as we are. So how does this relate to the exchanges that occur between people during dialogue?
Well, you have to attend to other people if you want to understand them, and you want to be an important part of whatever is going on. So I don't think anything is more essential than attention. There's a wonderful Zen story where the student comes and says, what's Zen about? And the teacher says, attention. And he said, what do you mean by attention? And the Zen master says, attention, attention. And he said, what do you mean? What do you mean? Attention, attention, attention. And that's the story. But yeah, everything happens when you put your attention on it. And if you're somewhere else, somebody else does something. You've lost touch with reality.
But just to mention that, it's also been said that our attention is our soul. It is the expression of our soul. I mean, that's our being.
That's a beautiful point. That's really important. So another beautiful point from session 4 yesterday, Dr. Julia Storberg talked about the value of honoring the sacred sovereignty of everything on the planet and the role of reciprocity in this.
Mhm.
Mm.
Can you take those two beautiful concepts and apply them to dialogue?
Well, dialogue
Well,
is
there's
very,
dialogue with people and there's dialogue with nature, dialogue with animals. All those things require attention and respect. So, Vicky, I've interrupted whatever you were
No,
saying.
I was
So,
going to say dialogue is all about reciprocity. There isn't any dialogue without
yes,
reciprocity. And
yes.
and in the same way that, referring to the last question, part of the thing that we can do in dialogue and mediation and all of the things we've been talking about are helping the other person see that maybe they're seeing with a particular pair of glasses. Because most of the time our glasses are completely clear. We see everything exactly the way it is.
Mm.
And it's only when we realize, oh, maybe there's a little blue tint to my glasses, or maybe I'm seeing something
Oh.
differently than you, like the example between the Japanese and the Americans, helping people see that they're wearing another pair of glasses is.
Well, sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I've had a couple of Japanese students, online when I was at Saybrook and the California Institute of Internal Studies. And both of these schools are emotionally intense. Once you get in a class, online class, you can talk about anything, your dreams, who knows what. It gets very intense. And a couple of the Japanese students have had a terrible time with that, because it's not in their traditional culture to bare your soul
Mhm.
like that. And so they worked with that, and we worked with them, and we all respected each other. But there were these huge cultural differences, I think. And I think they show up internationally either as well. I know the way Reagan treated the Chinese, he thought he was playing football. And, if you even watch Chinese movies, you see it's all about saving face all the time. And so, you couldn't have been more rude to the Chinese ambassadors than he was. So, yeah, you got to understand where the values are on both sides and respect them, I think, in order to have a dialogue.
Yeah, in dialogue, you really honor the other by your listening and
Yes.
by your empathy and by the way you're moved. So, I've seen tears and people across the aisles hugging, even though they may not agree on policies, but they understood the pain or the suffering. So I think it's that heart to heart, it's that heart intelligence that, crosses those boundaries.
Absolutely. Anil, are you wanting me to wrap up right at 8:30, or are we going over a little bit because we started?
Yeah. I think, but anyway, you should wrap up 5 minutes, because then we can discuss what the takeaways are. If you can move towards takeaway point, that's very important for this
Because
conference too.
I can move right now toward takeaways if you want me to.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so because I knew Anil was going to ask me about takeaways, I prepared a PowerPoint.
Ah,
Hey, very smart.
That's called fait accompli. You knew what takeaway would be.
Being very
Okay.
conscious.
Now, is that showing?
Not yet.
Oh, not yet. There we go. Now it is. So I kind of summarized an idea from each of the speakers, and this was based on our discussions previously and the exchanges we'd had and so forth. So I think these may not be, I think all of the speakers went beyond what's on this slide, but Allan, as a main point, we are connected. We influence others by who we are, and that each of us has an influence. Vicky, using dialogue to build bridges in mediation and developing consciousness to lay the foundation for that dialogue. David, with the powerful notion that image can inspire dialogue and bring people together. And I think inspiring that feeling level. And Mino, we use dialogue to get in touch with our own and others' divine consciousness. I love that phrase. And this came from one of your slides, the what's in italics. Dialogue is the stream of meaning flowing among, through, and between us. I just find that to be a very powerful and beautiful sentence and thought.
Thank you.
So my takeaways. Number one, that words, intentions, and feelings have power. Now, we didn't really talk much about intentions, but I think when we were talking about the influence of the individual, it's not everything that they just speak. It's what they think, what they intend, and what they feel. And all of those are part and parcel of the individual. And individuals have influence through dialogic exchanges on all of these levels. You can be with someone and maybe you don't speak the words, but the feeling exchange is very palpable and very powerful sometimes. Second point, through myriad forms of dialogue, we connect to others and facilitate one another's flourishing. And all of you have talked about so many avenues of dialogue. And it's just, before we did this panel, I had never spent that much time thinking about dialogue. So this has been just marvelous for me. Lots of insights here. The third point, the most profound dialogue is with the cosmic self. And this is things that I've gleaned from others and things, this is kind of my perspective. Being one with the transcendent is a dialogue of silence, of pure being. And that is just absolutely the basis of that integration of the divine consciousness with the self in activity. And then the last point, leaders and managers have outsized influence, and thus they have significant responsibility to nurture oneness and flourishing within themselves, because if they don't nurture it within themselves, they can't nurture it in others, in their organizations. So, and they need to do that. They have the responsibility. So there you go. Anil.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a round of applause. And,
are there any final comments from any of the panelists?
I would just say, experiencing through the conference and with Dr. Tony Nader and so on, but that our consciousness is all things. And there's just different ways of it. I'm experiencing what we're doing now, being out in nature, in our dream state, taking hallucinogenics or what, or through the meditation, opening to, but consciousness is actually everything.
Yes, beautiful.
And Dr. Travis gave an absolutely wonderful explanation of how that experience of consciousness, of silence, alternated with activity, just integrates that consciousness into activity and the coherence that it brings. Mm-hmm. And so we have just when I think about all the various sessions that this conference has and all the myriad points and perspectives, and my goodness, Anil and Dennis, you have outdone yourself in conceptualizing and organizing this conference. Yeah. I feel so honored to be a part of it, to have worked with all of you panelists. It's just been absolute bliss.
Thank you. Thank you. And I would also like to share perspective on, because the goal of this conference is to come up with a couple of, key takeaways at every level, at every session, and then in the whole day and the whole conference. I shared at the earlier session this idea that the principle of flourishing is this idea of expansion, the outside nature, and then also expansion on the inside. At some level, one could even see it as the dialogue between the outside world, nature, and the dialogue inside. And as Mino's beautiful last opening chart, Rumi's thing is a drop, and you're a drop in the ocean, but you're a whole ocean in a drop, and both are valid. It's very much that we are very much, maybe associating or sort of more focused on or fixated on a particular direction of the dialogue, and wait for Rumi every so often to tell us that the other way is also true. That inner expansion helps our broad perspective, and broad perspective helps our inner expansion. So I think you can see that as kind of a dialogue at a very different level, not among people, but about the sort of external world, external nature, internal nature. Make sense? Any comment?
Yeah. Absolutely. The whole keeps moving towards harmony, and dialogue is the tool.
Yeah, that's right. Harmony across almost every dimension that we can think of. So I thank you very much. Appreciate your time and your effort and your sharing all these things. Let me just start recording. We do want you to give feedback, so we just posted a link there. Please, everybody, if you can just click on that and give feedback. And once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.